Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
So we're going to start with some interview questions, and then later on we'll move to our student Q&A.
Great.
So for our first question, just so that the young people listening can learn a little bit more about you, could you please tell us about your career journey and your current role?
Yes, with pleasure. I have to say, I've never had a grand plan. I think pretty much every stage of the way, it's been about opportunities arising and grabbing them and leading me to the next stage. And so right from the beginning, I feel like I slightly fell into journalism. It was never a plan whilst I was at school. I think at one stage when I was at school, I said I wanted to be an actress or a lawyer or a scientist, or I think I even said I wanted to be famous enough to have a pub named after me. Didn't manage to achieve any of those, but in a funny way, journalism has meant an element of all of those, and that's the fun of it. It can encompass so many different things. When I was at university, I ran into some people who said they were setting up a radio station, which I thought just sounded really good fun. So joined in and became quite quickly the head of news and current affairs. It was a very grand title for a small group. And I presented most of our current affairs and news programmes. Not enough people, quite hard work, but it was fantastic training. And really, it made me think about not just what was important to me, but also what was relevant to other people, and finding people who have something interesting to say, and then thinking about counterbalancing that with a different view and how to remain impartial all the way through. And brilliantly, my programmes won an award, and I used the opportunity of the award ceremony to ask one of the judges for work experience at the programme he was working on at Radio 4. And really, that was that opening I needed. And I saw firsthand how professional broadcasters found stories, how they developed them, what worked and what didn't. And pretty soon I managed to move to pitching my own stories and being paid as a freelance reporter to work on those. And I loved it. Hard work, but great fun. And really such good training, because in order to earn a salary, to buy my next day's train ticket or to pay for a night out, I had to spot a story and how to tell it, and then find producers mostly who wanted to buy those stories. And these were original ideas that other people weren't telling. So I might find them from, I don't know, scraps in the local papers, or something that came up in a conversation with people, friends or strangers often, or things I saw and I wondered about. And then I'd have to find the people to talk to. I'd have to record the interviews, write the scripts, edit the pieces together. A very creative process. Whilst I was freelancing, the war in Bosnia had been going on for quite a number of years, but it had fallen out of the news, and I felt I no longer understood what was going on. And I thought, well, if I don't understand it, there must be the same for other people. And I was fortunate enough to meet a reporter who'd been covering the war, and he was due to go back. So I kind of said, can I come with you? And it was a huge experience, not without terrifying moments, and I don't recommend anybody heading to a war zone, but it opened me up to the value of what we call eyewitness reporting, which is going into communities and talking to people, piecing together what's going on and finding a way to translate that to what then were listeners for me in the UK that's relatable, that they could understand. And I particularly focused on young people, sort of my age, very similar to me, but their lives were being totally torn apart and really stolen when they were the very future that was needed. And I wanted to get their stories heard, and made a mini documentary for Radio 4. But off the back of this, I went a bit more newsy and got a role as a trainee at ITN, which I'm sure you know is a big production company which makes the news for ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5. And I learned how to make TV, and also really more about news, and did a whole variety of roles, but I'll pick out a few of them. But I was there for the launch of Channel 5 News a very long time ago, and it was very much a sort of startup culture with all hands on deck, and we all had to do everything. So I often went from running the news desk to presenting to camera work to being in the gallery, quite often all of that in one day, which was very groundbreaking. But again, it was all about seizing opportunities and initiatives and taking risks, really, and trying new ideas and pushing boundaries, and a really great starting place. I then moved to being a field producer for ITV, based in the north of England and then in London, and really covering all the biggest stories in the UK, but around the world too, covering some war zones again, like Iraq or Afghanistan, but also just big UK stories. And I absolutely loved it. Again, as a producer, it's your role really to make the team work. You have to get everyone to the story. You have to work out who to interview, what to film, how to get the story back to base, but also being competitive and doing what it takes to get your team ahead, to beat the opposition, to find the best people to talk to, hopefully exclusively, to find the new angle on the story and the most powerful pictures. And I have to say, it meant crazy long hours. I often had no idea when I'd be home. I could leave on a Monday morning and come back 3 weeks later, but loving every minute. And it could mean, interviewing the most famous people, or witnessing a huge court case, or chasing politicians down the road. But for me, kind of the most interesting bit was going to the homes of ordinary people, often experiencing the worst moments of their lives, but wanting to talk to you, and feel it's our duty to make them heard and treat them with the respect that they deserve, really. After that, moved to the BBC in Russia as a senior producer. Also interesting. I then had my daughters, and I worked for a while in a production company running their digital channels, and then moved back to ITN and ITV about 11 years ago. I went into being a news editor, which is really running and organising where all the camera teams and reporters should go and which stories we cover, and then became head of all of UK news, running all our teams in the UK. I then ran ITV London, so all the news for the capital. Moved back to Channel 5 to be editor there, and then came back to be editor of ITV News about 4.5 years ago. And just to sort of summarise that job, really, I'm basically in charge of all national news on TV and digital platforms. I do oversee ITV London still, and some longer form programmes. We make documentaries. We often make special programmes if there's a royal wedding or a general election, or if there's really big breaking news, we might cover that for the channel. And I have a team of about 270 staff, a bit more with freelancers. Our headquarters are in London, but we really believe in reporting from all across the UK. So we have teams Scotland, Wales, the north of England, and all around. And we also have teams in the US, China, and the Middle East permanently, and then send them around as well. So I'm responsible for all our news programmes, the things you might think of on TV, like News at 10, but also our digital content on our own website and across social channels. And it might be that you lot have seen a bit more of our content there. Quite often you'll see our stuff at the top of Apple News, if that's how you get your news. But we also have some services aimed at younger people, including the Rundown, which you might see on Snapchat. We have a lot on TikTok, Insta. We feel we have to go where our audiences are in that sense. And you may or may not know this, but ITV is one of the public service broadcasters. So that means by law, ITV has to provide programmes that benefit the public, and included in that is news that's not just news, but it's impartial, which means it's fair, it's balanced, it's based on facts. And I have to make sure that we deliver that, and we do that for all the big stories, plus the ones that we feel really matter to our viewers. And the ITV tradition really is making our news very relatable and putting real people, I guess, ordinary people at the centre of our stories. It's not just the experts talking down and saying this is what you need to know. But we also like to have quite a small group of specialist journalists who really explain what a story means and talk through it. And we really believe in going to a story and that eyewitness journalism that I was talking about, and seeing for ourselves what's happening. And I'll highlight a couple of things that you might have seen. But when Trump supporters broke into the White House last January, you might have seen pictures from a TV crew who went inside and were right there with them and talking to them and asking what they were feeling. Well, that was us. And it was our global exclusive, and we were the only ones who went in. And a lot of broadcasters, for whatever reason, chose to stand outside and report from afar, or sat in studios arguing about what was going on. For us, what we wanted to do is be there and witness the moment and not judge anybody going in, but just say, what are you doing and why? And as I said, that went all around the world. But we also like to prioritise original journalism and to really break stories and have stories that make an impact. And again, I'm sure you will have all seen the Partygate scandal, which the majority of that has been us. There's been stuff with the Mirror as well, but we've really been pushing that story and uncovering more and trying to hold the government to account, but always bringing it back to people and trying to remind our viewers. Do you remember where you were at the time and all the sacrifices? This isn't just something about politicians over there. This is something we were all in. So that's the sort of style of journalism. And just briefly, in September, I moved to be the chief exec of the whole of ITN, which is overseeing ITV News still, but also Channel 4 and Channel 5. And we make documentaries and other programmes for channels such as Netflix. We do sports, make education and films, and make video content for businesses. So it's just quite a nice story that you can start as a trainee in a company and end up as chief executive. I don't come from a business background, I come from a journalism background, but as I said, it's all about telling stories that people want to hear and making content that works, really. So lots in there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that gave us a really nice overview and some really nice different points of view from, really on in your career to later on. And it's crazy how you've worked up over so many years. I think it's sometimes a little bit shocking when you're like, oh, you work for a really long time, don't you? And it's a big part of your life.
But yes.
So our next question it's all around a little bit about technology. So could you tell us about the role of technology in your industry and how ITV has developed over time?
Yeah, I mean, when I started, they thought they were being incredibly high tech, that they'd moved from film to tape and to satellite news gathering, it was called, where you use satellites to send your pictures back. So very much, when I started out, we had tapes about that big that went in chunky cameras. And when you went out filming, you'd need to then physically get that tape back to the office. And sometimes that meant driving it or putting it on a bike. Or as I said, we'd have these huge satellite trucks and you'd have to play it in and get it over the satellite. And then you'd be editing on that tape in the field or back in space. And when it came to the programme, you had all your different bits of the programme and you would have a stack of tapes and somebody's job was to pull them in and push them out. Terrifying job. I hated doing that. I always thought I'd get it wrong. Now, obviously, that's all changed because it's all digital and it's cards and cameras that are that big. But you rarely have to bring them back. You tend to send the pictures back over the internet or over mobile phone networks if you're out and about in the field. We edit digitally on laptops and using a server in the office. And we still have those big cameras, but equally, you can do quite a lot with one of these. Whilst we would still do most of our stuff on big cameras, there's times when an iPhone or a mobile phone is the perfect thing, and you can be a bit more intimate really, and less intrusive. And a lot more people do more of the skills. So our journalists would now edit themselves quite a lot, and they might pick up a camera. So it's really changed a lot in that sense. And of course, we now have a whole digital service, which we never did originally. So the whole way that we transmit and get our content out has evolved. There's also whole areas around graphics. I mean, ITN has always led the way on graphics, or we always used to in the past. That's now become a much more universal thing. That develops and we continue using graphics in a storytelling way. But there's also this is quite old now, but if you watch our news programmes, you might think that the set looks real and it all looks real. The desk is real, but everything else is a VR set. That's quite old technology now, and a lot of people are moving back to real sets. But we continue to have that because it just makes things more flexible, and we can do different things with it. But you know, technology is changing all the time. We've got a huge refresh going on at the moment, where everything that we do is going to be in the cloud. So wherever you are in the world, you can work on your story along with everybody else. This whole idea of having to get your pieces back to the office won't happen so much. I mean, it's just catching up with existing technology, but always looking for new ways to make things work. But certainly I think one of the best things is it's all become a lot more accessible. You know, you, as I said, with your mobile phone can shoot something as long as you've got a good microphone and edit it yourself, and the rest of it, and that can be as good as people using the most expensive broadcast technology. So it's quite leveling in that sense.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting about you say about kind of using phones and things, and maybe that will inspire some of our young people watching to kind of get out there with their mobile phones and see what they can do, and see what's already out there and do something with that. So thinking of our young people, what advice would you give those watching that would like to pursue a career as a journalist in television in the future?
Yeah, I just start off with watching the news wherever you can find it. Now, if you want to watch news at 10, I'm delighted, but you don't have to watch that. You can watch news on TikTok, you can read it in the papers, you can read it online. Just consume a lot of it. And I think about what you like. You know, what makes a story interesting to you? What makes you switch off everything else you're doing and focus in on that, and the type of storytelling. I think absolutely, as you just said, is start creating your own pieces. It is so much easier now. You can do it, and you can publish things on your own channels. You know, you don't have to sell it to somebody else. You can just get it on YouTube to get people to see it and start feeding back to you. You know, there are stories everywhere. There are stories in your communities. There are things that you're concerned about, that your friends are concerned about, and just think about, actually, there may be other people who are interested in that. And there are the kind of basic journalistic things that everyone says about any story. There's think about who, what, where, why, and how. But it's a bit more than that as well. And I think I don't know if you still do précis in school, which I used to find so boring, but actually really useful, because it's all about condensing something down and working out the top line, that we call it. And it's like, what is the top line? What's the real story? What's the most important issue? The thing that sort of stands out and grabs people's attention. And I think beginning to understand that in your storytelling is really vital, and what you might need to do to bolster your story. So we might have someone who goes, I think the issue of this is really important. We'll say, yeah, well, the issue is great, but that doesn't make it a news story. And can you find some data? Can you do a survey? Can you find a key interview that then gives you that top line that makes it a story, really? And then I'd say, we can talk about this further, like grab any opportunities if you can't get a chance to shadow or to do work experience or spend time with teams. And really now, and again, we're happy to take more on this, you don't have to go to university, you don't have to do a course. I think any training is good, but there's lots of apprenticeships out there as well. And if you get any opportunities, it goes back to what I was saying. I think it's all about the ideas. And that's a way to stand out from the beginning. Nobody has a monopoly on all the good stories, and even the most senior people, we run out of ideas, we definitely miss things, or we haven't heard about them, tired. And you know, if someone's got ideas, fantastic, we're going to listen. And it doesn't matter if you're the most junior or if you're Trevor McDonald, you know, anybody's idea is valid. And I think whatever stage you'll stand out. And it doesn't have to be the next biggest award-winning investigation. It doesn't have to be Partygate or a huge scoop. It just might be somebody interesting to interview about an issue, or, you know, your suggestion on any of that is as valid as people who've been doing it for years, and just having that courage to think, well, I think it's interesting, and to speak up about it.
Yes, certainly. And kind of leading on to that, I'm going to go straight into our next question, which is, are you aware of any kind of work experience opportunities that are out there for young people, or any resources where young people can go to find out more?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough, and everyone says go and get work experience, and then you find that no one replies to you. It is really tough. I think most organisations now have official schemes that you can apply for. a lot of us, and I think correctly so, are moving away from the idea that you give work experience to your mates or your neighbours or someone you know. And actually, I think that's much better. So that usually means there's a proper scheme that you can apply for. There are some organisations like the Media Trust who are very good. They're very good at working with people from underrepresented groups. There was a stage when journalism particularly moved towards being very white and middle class and quite southern, but there's certainly a drive to make it a much more inclusive place and bolster people from underrepresented groups. And certainly, it never used to be a profession where you had to have a degree, and it went too far that way. So certainly there's some moves of this, but I think it's all about asking and having initiative. As I said, I walked up to somebody that I met and went, give me work experience. I often appear at events and I'm just waiting for people to go and ask me. So it's like, pluck up that courage and go and do it, because the starting point of journalism is initiative. I think it's worth looking locally. So, if you write to the big national organisations, that can take a while. But if you've got a local paper or a local website or a local radio station, or even hospital radio, they all want help. They all need help. So if you can actually go and be of benefit to them, not just shadow. But I think seize your opportunities. I just want to tell you the story of a really fantastic colleague of mine, Tyrone, who was still at college, further education college, and interested in journalism. And I think he was volunteering, or he was near the Olympics, and he spotted our sports reporter and walked up and said, oh, I'd love some work experience. And he contacted me. And so we brought him in while he was still at college, 1 day a week, because I wanted to get him in and train him up. And at the end of that year, when he finished at college, we were able to put him into paid employment. And he's now a senior news editor, I think it is, at Sky News. And it's all because he had the courage to go up and ask. And he didn't have any connections. He didn't have a dad in telly or anything. And I just look for those opportunities, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy that the people who do go out there and it can be quite nerve-wracking, can't it? But just pluck it up and take that chance, and you never know what will happen. So our next kind of question is around storytelling. So, how do you ensure that storytelling is original?
Yeah, it's a tough question, that one. There's no science to finding an original story. And sometimes you think, oh gosh, all the stories have been told, but actually it's finding a different take on them. And I think you just can't be going out and talking to people. And it goes back to my kind of eyewitness journalism, or going on the road or listening to people. And, sometimes we send people on a story to do X and they come back with Y. And I think it's always questioning and always asking. I think we like to have a bit of a culture of taking risks, and by that I don't mean being legally dodgy or libeling people, but thinking, oh, this isn't a traditional story, but maybe it is. And we had a really powerful series of reports, they're still going on, last year, about the really appalling condition that a lot of tenants are having to live in council and social housing in the UK. You might have seen some of it because it went everywhere. Awful mould on people's walls and water dripping, and this was just someone who sort of mentioned it along the line, and amidst some people were like, that's not a story, there's no sort of thing to it. But actually we investigated it, and just looking at it, it's like, hang on, we're going to bring this to the fore. So this is something that's been going on for years, but just no one had bothered to think, hang on a minute, we should be talking about this. So I think I say it's just looking and having your eyes open, and then trying to take a story further potentially, and trying to think, how can I push this on and have a different line to it.
Thank you for that one. So our last couple of questions before we move on to the student Q&A are kind of more about life lessons, and kind of what you've learned along the way. So yeah.
Sorry, go on.
So our first one is, what are some of the challenges that you have faced throughout your career?
Yeah, I mean, crazy long hours. I have to say that's got better these days, and there's much more of a system if you're at a certain stage of your career that if you work over hours you get them back. None of that in my day, and we quite often do double shifts and all the rest of it, which is fine. As I said, you could often leave on a Monday morning and come back 3 weeks later. So there's lots of things I've missed, you know, and lots of things I haven't made, and lots of traveling. But for me, the rewards have been great on that. They can be really, really tough, you know, if there's been some awful tragedy and people have lost their lives or been injured, you as a journalist have got to knock on the doors of strangers and ask them to speak to you, and that's tough. And you can also witness some really awful things, I suppose. And, you know, say there's a tragedy or something bad happens, most people are getting away from there. Journalists are moving into it, along with the emergency services. And, you know, COVID was like that. We did a lot of, you know, we were the ones out and about and going to people's houses and hearing the most awful stories. And, you know, you have to stay impartial, but that doesn't mean that you're inhuman. It doesn't, you know, not get you here. And, you know, a lot of our reporting of Ukraine has been really upsetting. I mean, for me, the most important thing is to discuss that and not hide it and not pretend it's not happening. It can be really, really stressful, really stressful. You know, it has been relentless for all of us the last few years with Brexit and COVID and Ukraine. And you need to be able to thrive on quite a lot of that. It can be terribly competitive. Certainly the culture I've created in my newsroom is we're not fighting each other, but you do have to fight to get into it and fight the opposition. And there's also some people still have a really dim view of journalists. I like to think we're a bit different in TV to print, but you know, these surveys come out regularly with the sort of rankings of the professions that people dislike the most or distrust. You know, we're worse than bankers, we're worse than estate agents, we're worse than telesales people. I think the only people worse than us are politicians, which says something. So, you know, you have to be quite thick-skinned. And I think when people get to know you, they realise as a journalist you're honourable and you're trying to tell people stories. But a lot of people think you just make it up or you're trying to get them. And, you know, you'll go out to the pub and everyone's like, oh, we can't tell her because she's a journalist. Oh, I'm not working, you know. So there is quite a lot of that around that, but I think the rewards are incredible. There's still, you know, our industry is changing and some areas are shrinking and the funding is shrinking in some areas. But I think digital provides an amazing growth opportunity as well. So there's still a thirst for news. It's in different forms.
Yeah, really interesting to hear about, you know, how things have changed with things like work. You know, obviously we have lots of rules in place and you didn't back then, and that must have been so tough on you.
Just kind of did it, if you know what I mean. I mean, I'm not saying we should go back to those times, and for me it gave me opportunities. So I might finish a shift here and then go somewhere else more exciting. Go, can I help out? And it gave me opportunities. But yes, I wouldn't recommend doing it now.
So before we move on to a student Q&A, last question. What are some of the life lessons that you have learned throughout your life and career? Yeah,
and so much of it is intertwined for me because my career has been my life. I hope not in a sad way, but you know, I've met my husband through my job. A lot of my friends are through my job, and for me, and this isn't the same for everybody, but for me, your job has to be really good fun, particularly if you're spending a long time doing it and lots of hours. And I think it's great to be proud of what you do and to do something interesting. I love, certainly in my brand of journalism, working in a team and the friendships that forms. And, you know, when you are going through very emotional things and also when you're creating something every day, you do form really, really great bonds. We do all get a bit addicted to achieving every day, and it is great. That's one of the nice things about news is you make something and then you walk away and the next day you make something else. So there's that, but that's not for everybody. I think in terms of lessons, and I hope I've said this already, for me, real people, ordinary people are far more interesting than famous people. I mean, you'll always have somebody who's done something amazing, who's inspirational, but it's those stories of people like us that I find much more humbling in a way than listening to an expert. I think wherever you are in life, you know, listen to people and be curious and wait to make up your mind and judge and think you know what it's about, and that's life as well as journalism, really. And I think you know, we cover a lot of bad things in news, and a lot of news is about bad news, but people are amazing and people are resilient and people do incredible things in such adversity, and I think you can find that quite empowering and uplifting. think in terms of a workplace, I think the culture is so important, and the culture is more important than anything else really, and it has to be inclusive, it has to have room for everyone, and we've all been working on it. We shouldn't have ever had to work on it, but I think a bigger drive around that. And I think whatever you're doing, I think you have to be truthful to yourself, and yeah, there was this image that I think holds still, that journalists are very hard-nosed and they're very tough, and we can see anything and we can do anything and bombs can go over us and we don't flinch. Well, you know, that's not true. And I think you have to show emotion, and certainly I stand up in front of my newsroom regularly and say, do you know what, that story's just made me cry, or I'm feeling a bit down about this. And I think we need to show emotion, and that's natural, and something's going wrong if we don't. And I also just think it's okay to be wrong. You know, we that's what I'm talking about, taking risks and being bold. Sometimes you're wrong. I try not to ever do anything in our bulletins that's not factually true. We check our facts before it happens, and I don't like to do anything that libels anybody or is legally wrong. But sometimes you just make a wrong call, or you do the wrong story, or all the rest of it. And you know, it's okay. Let's just deal with it, tackle it, and learn from it and move on. And we can't just be perfect all the way through. We're all trying, we're all learning. I will continue learning until the point where I can no longer speak probably. And certainly every stage of my job is about learning and loving the things that we learn along the way. So yeah, just take on these opportunities, give things a go. If they're not right, doesn't matter, move on. If they're great, brilliant, build on them.
I think that was a really kind of great few points there to finish our kind of formal interview with. So thank you for those, and hopefully our young people can pick out some of those kind of tips and things that you've mentioned. So we're going to move on to the student Q&A, and we've had a few questions submitted. A lot of the questions you kind of have answered already, so around kind of studying and university. So I'm going to mix several, like 3 or 4 questions that have come into one. Which is, was it difficult to find a job after university? And would you recommend studying journalism, or would a different subject like English or something similar be of more value?
I'll start with the second of those and then prompt me if I don't get around to the first one. So I think things have changed a bit. I didn't study journalism, I studied history, but there was scope within my degree. It was quite an old-fashioned degree, we didn't do very much, to then set up this radio station. No one ever asked me if I had journalism training. It didn't matter. And I think the great thing about a lot of universities and colleges is there's opportunities to do broadcast, even if you're not doing it as your degree. So I don't think you need to do it. I think it's a real shame in our industry that the number of training opportunities have shrunk. So again, 20 years ago, there would have been a load of local newspaper traineeships. You could have built your way up. I think it's a bit woeful of our industry that stopped. And then we saw the great rise in journalism degrees, but also postgrad degrees, a lot of which are really expensive. You know, if you're doing one in London, it's you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds, and you have to find somewhere to live. And that had become the kind of ticket to getting in broadcast. I think whilst that's still going on and is right for some people, everyone's looking for alternatives. And as I said, there's always apprenticeships as well. You don't necessarily have to do college. But undeniably, I think we probably expect our entry-level people to have had more training and to have learnt some stuff along the line. There are traineeships. ITV has them, BBC has them, and obviously everyone else has. But you almost need to have done a bit before. I think what journalism training does give you is your legal grounding. And if you don't have that, you probably need to find another way of getting it. Again, we train a lot of our younger people in it, but that can be a barrier in some places. But I genuinely think that having a different degree opens up your thoughts or possibilities. And certainly I don't look for journalism necessarily on a CV. If someone's got all sorts of other things, that's fine. Equally, a science degree, you know, that could lead you into specialism journalism or not, and anything that just makes you think and curious about the world can lead you to that. In terms of getting a job, the hard bit, I thought it would be really hard, and it is really hard. And I thought I needed something to make me stand out, and I did start an MA in Mediterranean studies, which sounded brilliant. And it was involving, I thought I had to learn a language, so I was learning Arabic, and I was learning all about the Middle East and Bosnia. And I thought I need to have that and go off and do that. Actually, I did about a week and realised I couldn't pay for it, and I was already freelancing at the BBC, so I just ditched that. For me, the route was very much that work experience that I talked about, and having that initiative and building up, and finding ways to get my stories placed. I thought I would freelance for years, and again that was a bit more the pattern then, and then it just happened to be that the ITN traineeship came up, and a lot of it was based around, the interviews all around Bosnia, and I'd just been in Bosnia, so as I say, I sort of fell into it. But no, I think it is tough. I think I personally don't like the idea that everyone has to move to London as well, and again there's a lot more push away from London for more opportunities. So I think if there's ways to start getting some experience outside of London, but yeah, it's a tough old industry. It's really tough. So it is hard, but it's just trying to build up those little bits on your CV and seizing the opportunities and be entrepreneurial. And I had a mentee for a while who I think he was in London when the Westminster terror attack happened. I'm not suggesting you wait for a terror attack, but I think he then just contacted Sky and said, I'm here, I can work for you if I want. And just being a little bit entrepreneurial around those things can start. My husband, who's a journalist, I think there was a flood in his street, and he phoned the local radio and said, do you want me to try and do something on this? And then, you know, that was his routine. So it's just, yes, it's looking for opportunities.
Fab, thank you so much. That definitely answers those questions. But do let us know, young people watching, if you have any more, do submit some if you've got something to say. So another question that we've had is quite a nice one. It's, what does your average day look like?
Without being facetious, I don't really have one, because they're sort of not normal times, but I suppose I'll try and pick a sort of normal-ish day. I would normally wake up about between 6 and 6:30. Try and get a bit of exercise in if I can. But the first thing I do, which is deeply unhealthy, is go straight onto my phone and read my emails. We have an overnight handover from our news desk, which will tell us the main things that have happened and pull the main stories out of the newspapers and the broadcast headlines. And so usually it's, if I need to react to something, then I'll do that immediately before I do anything else. Or if I need to take a line on a story, or if there's a problem. But if not, I would head into the office for between 7:30 and 8, try and read quite a lot of stuff on the way in, have a look at some picture when I get there. If anybody's interested in politics, I completely recommend the Politico morning email that you can sign up to for free. It tells you all the politics of the day, anything that's happened. It's in a really nice way, it's written in a brilliant way, and just get across the politics of the day, particularly with everything that's been going on the last few years. We hold our first big editorial meeting at 9 o'clock. And at that point, the news editors who sit across the UK news and the foreign news will have drawn up a list of what they think are the most important stories of the day, and how we're going to cover them and who we're going to send. And we debate those quite hard. I like everyone in my meetings to have a voice. I want everyone to contribute to what they think is important about the story. We debate them and we look at them and we make some decisions. And then other people might say, have you seen this story? And we work out what's going to go on programs, what's going to go on digital, what more we need to do. And we like to sort of think about the day as a whole. So we'll have our serious news stories at the top. We like to have something fun at the end so that people don't switch off completely depressed, and something that's a bit more, you know, uplifting or a bit different. We've got our evening news extended recently to an hour, which is a whole different challenge, and we put a lot more entertainment news in there. We have to have something really good for the middle of the programme to stop people switching off and going to other people. So there's a lot of shaping the programme a bit around that. But what I like to do at that moment as well is take a sort of instant stock take of who's contributing to our programmes. So the thing that's been really important for me is trying to make sure our programmes reflect people around the UK. So if we've got a bunch of white men, for want of a better word, at the top of our programme, if we've got Boris or Trump or Zelensky or all these people who are contributing and have to be in your piece, then you might want to think about balancing the rest of the programme and making sure we've got a bunch of fantastic women scientists talking about the COVID story, or that we are, if we're going off to do a talk to people in Birmingham, we're getting a whole range of people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And really, by thinking about it before we go to air, we can make sure that happens. So after that, we go out, everyone busily going off and making the news, and we make the lunchtime news. I usually do 1 trillion meetings, and then we, during the afternoon, come back and really finalise shaping the programme and what it looks like. And we react to breaking news. We might change things around, and problems happen or things change. And then really our big evening news is at 6:30 to 7:30. So I would normally watch that. If I'm in the office, I'll stand up at the end of it and debrief it. So we'll go through, that worked, that was brilliant, that didn't, we need to change that, and we'll do a tally of those voices. As I said, we work out our gender balance and our ethnic minority white balance, and really look at whether that felt in a good way. We also look at what's going well on digital and just talk a bit about that and those stories. I try to go home about 7:30, 8ish, and then when I'm home, try to have a life, and then have to sit down and watch our News at 10 bulletin and make sure that that's all right. That's quite a full-on day. There are some days when I go off and do other things. We also have weekly planning meetings, or I might go talk to people or meet people. I'll often meet with ITV, I'll meet with the rest of ITN. So there's a lot in between, but that's the sort of general structure of the day.
Thank you for that one. I know it can be quite difficult when you do so much a variety of things, but it's nice to kind of get that overview, particularly for your industry. So thank you for that one. We have time just for a couple more questions, and we've had a really great one come in, which is, what do you think about Twitter and how news kind of unfolds on there? What are your kind of thoughts and feelings on that?
Yeah, I think Twitter is really, really useful as a source of both information and engagement and opinion. I think if you relied on it totally, you would end up in this echo chamber. So I think it's, I have TweetDeck on all the time. It sits, in the corner of my screen, and it's my way of keeping across what's happening. And very often breaking news is there these days. But as I say, it's a source. And if you see something, then you need to go and check it out. Equally, if there's a big breaking story, we would go straight onto Twitter to look for picture and for comments of people who are saying stuff, and particularly the eyewitness stuff. Obviously, with the hugest caveats, because a big story breaks, people put any old rubbish up, claiming it's the story that they're talking about. So huge amounts of verification goes on with it. It's not just Twitter, but social media generally has been so important with Ukraine. So we are on the ground in lots of places, but there's other places behind Russian lines or further away where we've needed it to get that eyewitness reporting from people, not us. So I think it's great. I think we will always have a Twitter strategy for a big story, and it's a good way of getting it out there. And when we did our first Partygate story, you might have seen the one where the government spokesperson was standing up doing a pretend press conference and going, "Oh, what party?" That one. We did actually put that out first of all on digital, and I remember we weren't quite sure what people would make of it, and we sort of pressed the button and sat back, and we just watched Twitter doing that, and we're like, okay, people are interested. And the line we'd very much tried to take wasn't just get the government, it wasn't at all. We were putting the facts there, but we wanted to talk to people about it. And when we saw ordinary people, horrible word, going, "Oh my goodness, I remember where I was. This is so important." We're like, okay, this story matters. And then we could generate quite a lot of that interest for our later news bulletins. I think at the same time, there can be all sorts of awful stuff on Twitter. A lot of our people do face really appalling abuse that they shouldn't have to. You have to develop a very thick skin, particularly as an on-screen person. I wish they didn't have to. Some of the really bad stuff we will tackle, but a bit of that comes with the territory. At least we have protections and things we can do a bit. I really feel for people who just experience a Twitter pylon for having done nothing wrong. I think it can be really insidious. So I think it has its its benefits, but I think there's a lot of caveats with it. But certainly it's part and parcel. So we have to deal with it. But you know, there's so many other platforms and so many other channels now which don't always have all of that nastier side as well.
Thank you so much for answering that one. We are almost out of time. So do you have any kind of final thoughts that you would like to kind of leave today with our young people?
Yes, just from the top of my head. I'm really pleased if anyone still wants to do it. You know, it's a tough old place. You know, the hours can be terrible, as I said, the pay can be terrible, or worse than it was. You know, we are seen as worse than everybody else. But it is fun, and I think it's a real privilege, and I think it's really important. You know, and people love to tell you news is dying or no one cares and everyone just wants their news from elsewhere. But there's still a place for that trusted, impartial news. And I think, yeah, if anybody's still up for doing it, brilliant. And your career will be totally different to mine, and you'll laugh at the kind of old days when we talked about Twitter, because you'll be doing something far more interesting. But just people are always going to have stories that need telling. So if you're up for that, I think go for it, and you'll be really, really rewarded in terms of a rich, fulfilling career.